Okay, folks, welcome back to Battle for Azeroth. Wanted to quickly go over some of the talents for Elemental Shaman. They are offering 100% bonus experience, so that motivated me to finish leveling my Dark Iron Dwarf, who is a shaman, of course, and I have mainly been doing PvP. I did some questing, but I was mainly doing PvP, so this is going to be more PvP focused. I took some different talents, just to kind of play around. So I started out with Echo of Elements, which is my default choice normally, because it gives Lava Burst 2 charges. I just recently swapped that out for Earth and Rage. It doesn't look like it does a lot of damage. It mimics what the old Elemental Mastery used to do, which was hurl like molten lava from the ground at your target. Essentially was the broad overview of it. Earth and Rage just throws earth at your target. It did really low damage, obviously when I was a lower level, so it kind of got to a point where it's like, well, let me take a look at it and see. And in PvP, you're doing a lot of movement. So having something, as long as you start attacking a target, it'll just keep um, it will just keep going for however long. It says 6 seconds. I'm not exactly sure how that 6 seconds is reset. It seems like it just keeps going until the target either dies or you stop attacking them. One of the two. The only thing I was kind of unsure of here was maybe like Elemental Blast. It just because it gives you a 10-second buff. I didn't take this just for the simple fact that I kind of already have enough abilities. Elemental is one of those few classes that actually has quite a few abilities still. So by the time you add up your baseline and your talents and everything, I mean, this is what I'm left with, and I have, several bars of abilities. So with totems and elementals and everything else. So yeah, I think this could maybe be viable. I've played with this before. I think I want to say sometime around Warlords they introduced this, because that's when I remember first playing with it, when it was higher, kind of higher up here in the talents. So yeah, I don't remember liking it though. So as I said, it does give haste, and haste is kind of what um, I've been needing, I've noticed in PvP. So for that reason, just trying to keep a buff up though, just the kind of the coordination of it. I just was like, no, Earth and Rage seems to work. I went back and forth, played some games with Elemental Echo of Elements, and then Earth and Rage. And Earth and Rage, you seem to do slightly more damage with Echo of Elements. It was about even, depending on the game. It kind of tipped one way or the other. Earth and Rage just seemed to mesh better with the setup I have and the kind of playstyle I was trying to go for. So Totem Mastery, still not sure / convinced this is the optimal talent here. It does give me haste, which again I said I find myself kind of needing. I started out with elemental trinkets, or intellect trinkets, and swapped those out for haste trinkets fairly early on and noticed a significant increase in my DPS. So I was just kind of running with that. This does give you kind of an aura or kind of an AoE effect, so you don't have to be right by it. You can just kind of drop it, and then, as I said, PvP, there's a lot of movement. Anybody that's played PvP knows that, especially depending on the map you're on. Works really well on like a Rothy Basin or something where you're going to be fighting like at one base. You can kind of drop it, and if you're fighting like around the flag, that's small enough area, you're going to benefit from the effects, regardless of where you move, almost, unless you go chasing someone off to finish them off or something. So everything else is pretty standard, I'll say, to kind of what I take. I took Nature's Guardian over Ancestral Guidance, which is kind of something I go back and forth on. During Miss, when you were doing a lot of daily quests, Ancestral Guidance was actually pretty good because it worked as a pretty decent self-heal on rares and just kind of tougher mobs and things like that. Even though it says it heals party members, you are considered a party member. If this works vaguely how it used to, I don't specifically remember how it worked before. I remember it kind of worked like a vampiric touch, where based on the damage you did, damage and healing is converted to healing for up to 3 nearby injured party members. It's something to that effect. I think it seems like I remember it was more of like an AoE effect before. So, again, PvP, I wanted something. I am getting better at kind of like one-on-one. So I wanted something that would let me survive if I was getting low on health, getting towards kind of the end there. At lower levels, people weren't interrupting as much. They weren't trinketing out of stuff as much, so you kind of had a little more flexibility. Now that we're getting into higher levels, I'm 110 now. I was 60, I think, when I started. Now people are kind of, trinketing out of things. I took Lightning Lasso as my PvP talent. People are trinketing out of that now. They weren't at lower levels. So I was able to kind of heal, get 1, 2, 3 heals off with Healing Surge. Now it's kind of a gamble, depending on how much the person's kind of paying attention and I think familiar with their class and whatnot. So Nature's Guardian just seemed like a default choice for me for what, again, kind of the play style I was going for, the setup. And then I took Primal Elementus. Normally I've been taking like Ice and Fury, or I took Surge of Power. The problem with Surge of Power is it is based around you using Earth Shock. And I don't very often use Earth Shock. Again, you have to be on a map like a Rothy Basin where you're going to be at a base fighting for a few minutes to build up enough Maelstrom to use it. Of course, Ice Fury grants you Maelstrom, but Ice Fury and Surge of Power are on the same tier, so they just kind of cancel each other out. I've taken Ice Fury on my max level Shaman, my Alliance Shaman, and it works fine. It's just, again, kind of a extra ability you always have to you just kind of always have to be using. And I just kind of wanted to try. I liked using Lightning Lasso. It kind of did the same thing. It stuns the target. It's a channeled ability. So between Frost Shock, which I tend to use just to reduce movement speed, not so much for damage. I've been in battlegrounds where other Shaman have taken Ice Fury and their DPS was a little bit higher than mine. It just kind of depends on the group and the map, basically, on whether this is. I think it's slightly a situational ability, as odd as that might sound. If you wanted to get into kind of a more kind of a CC setup, I would definitely say take this. I was using my elementals quite a bit. So I went ahead and took Primal Elementus just because I could, just to kind of see what it did. Again, it's kind of one of those abilities I've taken at different times, different patches, different expansions, whatnot. It's been around. The first time I can remember taking it was in Warlords. So I'm not sure if we had it much before that. That was still at a point where you could only have 2 specs. So I tended to play enhancement more on my other Alliance Shaman. I was using what's now my main character Shaman, more for healing. People didn't, or I didn't typically change specs that often unless I was like leveling or trying to do something for the legendary ring or something like that. Normally you would just kind of stay in a spec, and by the time you got to max level, you really weren't doing a lot of DPS anyway. We were mostly queuing for things, either dungeons or raids or something else. I think we still had realm hopping then and things like that, so there really just wasn't a lot of need for it. So yeah, so I find that if you're trying to, again, if you're kind of one-on-one or you're trying to take down a healer, I'll use Earth Elemental because it's supposed to taunt the target, so it'll actually go run after him. So it's just kind of a nice distraction to keep them occupied, while you can try to hopefully DPS them down. And then when Earth Elemental is on cooldown, I'll just use Fire Elemental, basically. For some reason, I'm not sure if it's a glitch or if I'm just not using it correctly, but it doesn't seem to let me use both of these. I thought there were a few games where it did, and then all of a sudden I noticed like one kept canceling the other one out. And I'm not sure why, because they don't share a cooldown. So, and nothing I've seen says you can only have one. So again, not sure if that's a glitch or if I'm just not using it correctly, which is entirely possible. They've made some changes to elementals, is why I said it. I may not be using them correctly. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, I know they kept lowering the cooldown on Earth Elemental, so you had kind of more of a tanking pet, questing, dungeon group, what have you, if you're waiting for a queue for a tank, those kind of situations. Fire Elemental is just a elemental pet, so that's why I said when Earth Elemental's on cooldown, I'll use Fire Elemental again, like a Rothy Basin, if you're trying to fight for a base or something like that. He will run with you. The nice thing is they took away their totem, so they're not tethered. by having to be within so far of a range. They will run with you wherever you go on any particular map. So that's kind of nice. You don't have to worry about wasting a cooldown and using them at the wrong time. And then I just went ahead and took Stormkeeper just to try to use Lightning Bolt more since it has a little bit longer cooldown. I'm getting to the point where I have enough haste now where it's not a big deal, especially when I have Totem Mastery down. This was a pretty decent artifact ability, so I went ahead and I've taken it a couple different times. I think I've swapped. I would have to check to be sure, but I think I took Ascendant on my main max level Shaman, or I may have kept Stormkeeper. I'm not entirely sure now. Ascendant usually was kind of my go-to. This was like our, if I'm not mistaken, this was our level 85 ability. Back when that one ability was like supposed to be super good to mimic like the last tier in your talent tree kind of thing. And I like Ascendant. It worked well on all three specs. It was one of the few abilities I can remember that I liked that worked really well on all three abilities. And I can remember when I leveled up and first got this too. Again in Mist, it was in Karasong Wilds, I think was the name of it. Yeah, so Stormkeeper works perfectly well. I found with Echo of Elements, I wasn't really using the second charge as much. I was waiting for it to proc so it would be an instant cast and do more damage. So Flame Shock, Lava Burst, and then I'll use Stormkeeper depending on what we're doing. If you're in like Eye of the Storm, this is really good for AoE because you can get 2 Chain Lightning off and then use Earthquake. I hardly ever use Earthquake because I just don't have the Maelstrom, number 1. And number 2, I'm rarely in an AoE situation. You're usually focusing down either a Plague Carrier or, like I said, going kind of one-on-one or healer, something like that. I've had more players, I think, try to come after me than I have as a healer. And I think that's because people are kind of figuring out. I've seen other people play Elemental Shaman in PvP, and they were really good. That's why I wanted to play Elemental Shaman and kind of just try to get used to it, better at playing it. Shaman's not actually a character I play a lot in PvP, ironically. I don't know why. Every time I have, I'm just like, nope, I'm gonna go play a different class, different character. And then the characters that I play more regularly in PvP are not characters I generally play in PvP or PvE, excuse me. So it's kind of a nice balance on one hand because you don't get old with playing one character over and over. On the other hand, I kind of end up in situations like this where I'm like, I know this class, I'm just not familiar with it in this setting. So the haste was kind of the big thing. Once I figured out the haste, I kind of, like I said, kind of started running with that and started taking haste wherever I could, and that seemed to help. And then, of course, as you level, especially through different expansions, the first few brackets are fairly, what's the word I'm looking for? Fairly, there's not much of a change. You're just leveling up, so your abilities are getting better as you go along. Once you start getting into different expansions, PvP starts to change a little bit here and there. So, yeah. So there we go, folks. Yeah, like I said, it took Lightning Lasso as far as the PvP talents go. Um, I think the way they have it now, it's pretty much kind of personal choice, whatever your personal preferences. There are some abilities like Lightning Lasso. I've seen almost every, I won't say every, quite a few Shaman have taken. Just like Greater Pyroblast, almost every mage has taken. There's usually like one ability, depending on what class you are and what spec you are, that is really good right now. Everything else is just kind of, like I said, personal preference. Spectral Recovery I took just because, again, in PvP you're running around a lot. Just to take advantage of Ghost Wolf. And I remember I got used to my artifact. I think I would have been in Restoration, I think probably the most often anyway. But I think there was a talent for each spec that enhanced Ghost Wolf form. So, and it works well with Spirit Wolf. So, Ghost Wolf does a bunch of different things when you, yeah, Spectral Recovery, yeah. So not terrible. And then at 110, I just unlocked the third PvP talent, so I just took control of lava. So I'm gonna still playing around with this to see how this works, but it enhances lava burst damage. So, and it does seem to proc quite often when I'm running through my rotation. So, yeah. So there you go, folks. There is a bit of an overview for Elemental Shaman in PvP. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope that was helpful for you. Hope that made sense. And thank you for watching.